Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Dizenghausen is here with you. Today is May 30th. There are a lot of interesting news stories in this episode. Moscow is refusing to reveal the text of the memorandum until the very last moment. The Turkish Foreign Minister has warned the Kremlin about what will happen if they do not agree to a ceasefire, and Putin has given a very strange gift to Kim Jong-un. Also, I'll tell you who the Kremlin doesn't mind giving as much as 4 tons of gold to, just like that, with a generous hand. And of course, about the backstab to the Russian Federation from a close ally. And at the end, since today is Friday, we'll find out whether artificial intelligence understands who the Pleshizavr is and what this artificial intelligence now calls Medvedev. All this and more in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. First, about the negotiations, briefly. So the round of negotiations is scheduled for June 2nd in Istanbul. That's Monday. That's literally right now. Russia has proposed to present its memorandum with their terms only on site. Basically, they're saying, we'll arrive, and only then will we show it to you. And let me remind you, Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Rustem Umerov, said that our version of the memorandum has already been provided to the Russian side for review. So, as always, Putin is playing his shell game diplomacy. You present your memorandum, and we'll show ours somehow right there on the spot. We'll read yours first, and then we'll show you ours. That way, you don't have a chance to prepare, but we do. In their view, apparently showing the goods before the purchase is considered unconstructive. Let me remind you. It was actually Peskov who said, well, we can't show the memorandum, that would be completely unconstructive. But if they're dragging it out until the very last moment, it definitely means there's something nasty in their text, in their memorandum. And honestly, there always will be, because this is the Russian Federation. But I think there are several of these nasty things in there. The question is something else. We're going to see this text anyway. They still won't be able to avoid the issue they've raised, the withdrawal of our troops from those cities that Russia couldn't even manage to enter. In other words, Putin is like a grumpy old man. I want it, I want it. I wrote it into the constitution. Give me those 4 regions. Give them to me. They still won't be able to get around this point. And this point has to be included in the text of the memorandum. So then, what do we do in this situation? What is it that Putin will come up with? Well, he'll buy himself 2 weeks, which Trump, with his ever-shifting deadline, always gives him. And then what? The question then arises about how tough Donald Trump will be. Recently, there was a very remarkable incident that I came across. There was a press conference at the White House, and Trump, so a CNBC journalist asked Trump about the acronym TACO. That is, if you translate it, it means Trump always knocks off, or Trump always caves. This acronym was coined by another journalist. So what is the essence of it? It's that Trump first throws out some super tariff and then backs down. So this acronym appeared, Trump always caves. This is about Trump's toughness right now. So, do you know how Trump responded? Don't you dare talk about what you just said. That's a disgusting question. It's called negotiations. Usually I have the opposite problem. Everyone says you're too tough. So it turns out that's how it is. Maybe, I'm not arguing, maybe Trump can show toughness. By the way, I remember how Putin's advisor Ushakov recounted that neither Trump nor Putin wanted to be the first to hang up after a phone conversation. Well, you hang up first. No, you. That's the kind of tough Donald Trump we're talking about. But Europe is showing support and, moreover, a willingness to provide both military and financial assistance. Germany is providing additional military aid worth 5 billion euros and is engaging in joint production of long-range missiles without range limitations. Of course, this production will take time before it actually materializes but as long as we have such a neighbor right next to us, we need to understand that even if this one goes to the underworld today, the system will simply produce another one exactly like him to take his place. I'm almost certain that it will be just as disgusting. So as long as such a system exists there, they will keep fighting. They will keep threatening their neighbors. That's why, of course, we need to think about the future as well. And naturally, Russia accused Germany of direct involvement in the war over such statements. As I already mentioned, Simonian absolutely lost it over this, and she said something like, I've heard that in Moscow offices they're planning to bomb Berlin. Well, apparently just like they bombed Washington, London, and Paris after the missile deliveries. By the way, there's still no news about the Taurus. But it turns out it wasn't just Simonian who lost it. Shoigu did too. I thought he was just a faceless Security Council secretary now, but apparently he still says things, still shows up. Friend, how unpleasant, right? All his acquaintances and relatives have been caught stealing from the army, and yet he's the secretary of the Security Council. But there's nothing to be done. Putin, it seems, knows too much about Putin, about their joint, shamanic trips. So Shoigu stated that Moscow has ways to respond to the decision by Germany, the UK, France, and the US to lift those restrictions. And he added, I won't elaborate, but we have things we can lift in response to these actions. What are you planning to film there? I don't get it. Is it the diaper of decrepit Molly or what? Or maybe it's another masterpiece from Soyuz Multfilm, the kind Putin always played at his various speeches, showing off like, look, these are our missiles with no analogs. This is the one that flies, circles all of space, and comes back 1 billion times around the globe. No one can shoot it down. It will supposedly destroy everyone on its own. So what exactly are you planning to launch? Let me just remind you that when we first started receiving missiles, Russia threatened to hand over weapons to someone who would strike those supplying missiles. Missiles to Ukraine. For example, to the so-called Houthis. Those were the kinds of statements being made back then. Let me emphasize once again, to fight NATO head-on directly. Never in his life. Never. He uses other people's hands. Putin, as I've said 100 times already, always tries to do evil through someone else's hands. Only when he realizes there will be no punishment, only then does he say, yes, that was me. That was me. But the Turkish Foreign Minister made a very interesting statement. Let me remind you, on the eve of the second round of negotiations, he flew to Moscow, and now he is in Kyiv. That is yesterday, and today he is in Kyiv. So, by the way, for anyone traveling there, if he hasn't left yet, at least yesterday, the area was blocked off. So, on the eve of the second round, Hakan Fidan visited Moscow and made a statement. Given that Turkey always makes its statements very carefully, especially on international issues, I think it's impossible to interpret his words any other way in this case. Look, Russia could find itself in a disadvantageous position compared to the US and the international community if it does not show the same flexibility as Ukraine and the European Union on the issue of an immediate ceasefire. In my opinion, it's simple. Ukraine has already said 100 times, we are ready to unconditionally cease fire even tomorrow. If Russia does not show similar flexibility, it will find itself in a disadvantageous position compared to the US and the international community, which Turkey, of course, also considers itself a part of. That's why the Kremlin announced that Putin generally supports the idea of a ceasefire, but there are many questions about this idea that still need to be answered accordingly. But the hyaluronic swindler thinks that everyone around is some kind of fool. That is, to declare a ceasefire for Easter or for May 9th, there are supposedly no numerous questions that need to be answered. But now suddenly there are. After the parade, Putin supporters wrote to me both that day and afterwards in the comments, saying it was an excellent parade, that Putin is the best president, and so on. But can someone tell me what this condition is called, when a person just screams at the top of their lungs, Putin is the president of peace? Like that? And then when you ask him about his pension, he says, well, it's those damned officials, Biden, Obama, and Trump. They're all to blame. What is this condition called? What really stuck with me from that parade was, first of all, how they showed it. It was all jumbled, just a quick flash, somewhere over there. And I remember one moment in particular, how Putin was groveling before the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping. Oh my goodness, how did it hang on his ear like that? That was pure Putin in his old role as Sobchak's bag carrier. And just those fawning gestures, those shifty eyes, the way he was whispering something in his ear, he was probably happy, right, that nothing would suddenly come flying at the stands. and Putin wouldn't have to dash off, losing his 2-inch heels, elbowing and kicking his way through, shoving the remaining veterans aside to get to his little luggage room. He was really happy about that. In general, Ukraine will demand an immediate 30-day ceasefire. This is our main demand. And in terms of toughness and an adequate perception of Russian policy, I recently came across a video of Senator John McCain from 2014. In the video back in 2014, the now late John McCain unfortunately said that Putin's next step would be to separate eastern Ukraine and create a land corridor to Crimea. At that time, he criticized the United States for refusing to supply weapons to Ukraine, believing that these attempts to appease Putin only provoked him further. He didn't just believe it, he always spoke about it. And I looked at his statements, especially the ones that really concerned me. He was actually a genuinely, truly cool and remarkable guy, probably one of the very last remaining individuals of that era. And what did he say about Ukraine, about Russia, about Putin? He said, "I saw 3 letters in Putin's eyes, K, G, and B." So back then he said that this is his entire authoritarian nature. There is no such thing as Putin the person. Putin the stove maker, Putin in Sokoniki, Putin with children, Putin with wild boars. No, there is only an authoritarian psychopath. And he was right. He also said that Russia is a gas station disguised as a country. That's just spot on. And this very phrase, which probably should have been given to every president who came and was planning to have any kind of dialogue with Putin, it should be the very first thing in the handbook of tips. Nothing provokes Putin like weakness, that is, he always said this. Moreover, in 2017, McCain openly said that Putin is a killer and a criminal, while some people are even afraid to call him a dictator. He was really, really impressive. By the way, there is a street in Kiev named after John McCain. This is Ivana Kudry's ex. All in all, what can I say? He was truly outstanding. By the way, friends, let me remind you that we are still far from peace and our soldiers always need help. That's why we are running a major fundraiser for the Freedom of Russia Legion, who are now on the front lines and carrying out combat missions, not only at the front, but also deep behind enemy lines. We are raising funds for UAVs, radios, and electronic warfare equipment. So I kindly ask for your support. There are many of us here, and together we are doing a truly important and meaningful thing. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There you'll also find the Legion's bank card number and a PayPal account for those who want to help from abroad. I see all of you. Thank you all so much. Just wow. And now, friends, we have a scandal involving one of Putin's allies. I hope and think you've heard that it turns out Serbia has been supplying ammunition to Ukraine. And Vučić, who attended Putin's parade, who beats his chest and says, "No one will ever make me give up my friendship with Putin." We know this. And now the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service is accusing Serbian defense companies of supplying ammunition using fake certificates through some intermediary countries and so on. And this Vučić, who is always so full of bravado, admitted that he discussed this issue with Putin, will set up some kind of working group, but at the same time emphasize that the industry is profitable, the industry is large, and it should keep operating this industry, and there should be contracts. And when I saw his pompous speech in which he was justifying his trip to Putin for the parade, I realized that Vučić is an extremely cunning character. Remember how he said, "Punish me, but not my country. The citizens of my country are not to blame for anything. It's me, Vučić, who will go to Putin for the parade. So hold me accountable for everything. I must suffer for my country. I will shield the whole country with my chest." Come on, why are you turning the event of going to that total scumbag, a murderer, a dictator, into some kind of heroic act? The country won't suffer. Don't worry. You'll be removed, someone normal will come, and everything will be fine in the country. By the way, taking this opportunity, I always express my support for the citizens of all countries who help and who help on their own, even if their government is against it. I never associate the citizens with the leadership. Sometimes their perspectives on an issue can be completely different. But believe me, in this club of dictators that Putin belongs to, actions like these, oh, I had no idea that we were selling something to your enemy. I didn't know about it. And here, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service comes directly into the information field. In other words, he knew everything perfectly well. By the way, this slyness might actually help him stay in power a bit longer. So, in the club of dictators, they'll just as easily stab you in the back with a smile when they realize you've become weak. And I think that's exactly what will happen to Putin. He'll just be completely stunned when he realizes how many so-called friends from the club, though in the dictators' club, they probably don't really exist. Well, his partners, his allies, will immediately rush to carve up his dear Russia. He can't even imagine how many of them will show up once Russia starts to go under, just like the Soviet Union did back in the day. And that time will come. Western intelligence agencies have reported on a very unusual gift from Putin to Kim Jong-un for his help in the war. You know, when I joked about dictators giving each other missiles as gifts, I had no idea just how close I was to the truth. Do you know what Putin gave to Kim Jong-un? He gave him at least one Panzer-class air defense system vehicle. So that's the kind of gift we're talking about. I've said this more than once already. Remember when Putin visited Kim Jong-un, Kim gave him a tombstone as a gift. It's a black sarcophagus, so to speak. And there, in a little circle in the center, framed in silver, is Putin's portrait. And there's also an engraving on this black surface. Some kind of Kremlin, I don't remember exactly, and some fireworks. All in all, it's a magnificent tombstone. So, the Panzer system, let me remind you, this is an air defense system designed to destroy airplanes, helicopters, cruise missiles, and drones. In other words, it will significantly strengthen North Korea's air defense system, and Kim Jong-un will be better protected. These dictatorial games, they're strange, aren't they? One moment Putin gives some rings to the guys, so this gesture can basically be interpreted as, I'm concerned about your safety, Kim Jong-un. Now it means you're safe. I'm protecting you with this umbrella, this panzer. So that's how it is. But Kim Jong-un wasn't the only one to receive gifts in the form of nuclear kinkali. Putin paid Iran for drones with 4 tons of gold bars, and so Moscow, there were 2 shipments. Moscow delivered one of almost 2 tons and another of just over 2 tons, so 4 tons in total. Moreover, for these shaheds, the document was signed between an Iranian manufacturing company and the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, which is actually where these drones are assembled. In recent programs, I did a review about what kind of student ghetto that is, what kind of sect they're building there, so I won't dwell on that now. So why gold bars? Because gold makes it possible to bypass restrictions related to financial transactions in US dollars, which can be blocked or complicated due to sanctions from the US Treasury. Well, that's basically how it is. Actually, now I realize that Putin has gold, Putin has diamonds, Putin has dollars, Putin has, I don't know, absolutely anything you can possibly imagine, for everyone except Russians. The residents of the Kursk region have probably already worn a 2-meter deep hole in the ground with their knees, standing and begging Putin for compensation for their destroyed homes, which, by the way, is his own fault. And that's why I think that in Medvedev's famous phrase, like, there is no money, but you hang in there, there needs to be a bit of clarification. Something needs to be added to that phrase. For you, Russians, there is no money, but you hang in there. While for everyone else there is money, and there's gold too. And here's some news that I think makes Medvedev pound on his toy nuclear button every day, the one they put in his nursery. This is news that is really infuriating the Kremlin right now. The drone attacks on Moscow and the Moscow region have become a major problem in recent weeks. It has really turned into a systemic issue. Just imagine. Now Sobyanin starts every morning by reporting how many drones were shot down over Moscow and the Moscow region. Naturally, according to them, no one ever gets hurt and nothing ever gets hit. But I keep coming across more and more videos, and you know how it is on TikTok. You watch something once, and I actually watched this video 3 times on purpose, so TikTok figured out that I was interested in it. What video? The ones where in Moscow airports, the so-called elite of the nation, with these red, almost burgundy faces, both men and women, are just screaming at the staff like seals. Why can't we fly out? Why? Huh? Where? Get the manager over here. Give me free booze or something else. So this is all happening there right now on a massive scale. And when we first talked about this, many people wrote in, for example, from Turkey, saying that Russians are sitting there and can't fly out. It's like a real mystery. Russians are sitting there, but they can't leave. Well, this is classic. Classic, because after this, just imagine the level of cynicism. After this, Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Nebenzia, whom you know, came out and promised that they would keep striking Ukrainian cities until Kiev stops drone attacks on Russia. In other words, Ukraine must stop launching drones at Russia if it wants the shelling of its cities to end, said the representative of the Russian Federation. Just how utterly hopeless are they, right? I remember there was a period when Ukraine didn't launch a single drone into Russian territory. The shelling didn't stop. Moreover, Russia was and still is pounding away with everything imaginable. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, glide bombs, you name it. But the fact that this bald Jabba the Hutt from the Russian Federation at the UN is already starting to proclaim, enough, stop hitting our territory, that says a lot. Naturally, there are consequences as well. Hundreds of flights are already being cancelled and rerouted, snowballing more and more. Turkmen Airlines is suspending regular flights to Moscow. You know what I liked? So they say the situation is such, and honestly, I think that after the Azerbaijani airliner was shot down, no sane airline should have been flying there at all. But as we can see, well, probably the sane ones aren't flying there. So what Turkmen Airlines is currently offering as compensation to passengers who have already purchased tickets and made bookings on their flights is a complimentary, no-cost transfer service that will take travelers from Kazan Airport directly to Domodedovo Airport. This is intended to assist affected customers with their onward journey. A ground transfer, I should remind you, if ChatGPT isn't lying to me, it's about 900, maybe a bit less kilometers, a ground transfer. In that case, you might as well just drive there. Why even bother buying a plane ticket at all? So it's become a real problem. And you know what else? Every time some of the drones make it to Moscow and Russians there say they're falling on residential buildings, on rooftops, somewhere in Odinsovo, somewhere else. So it turns out that the defense system isn't perfect. So that's how it is. And every time groups of drones fly over the Russian capital, I think that now, at least a little, Muscovites are starting to remember that there's actually a war going on. Although I could be wrong. When drones started hitting Moscow City, that's when everyone really felt it. But not for long. This time, it'll probably be even more noticeable. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And if you're already subscribed, make sure to hit the notification bell. And now it's time for the segment, What I've Taught Artificial Intelligence. So I chat with the AI. Well, how should I put it? I work with ChatGPT 3, and from time to time, to help it understand, I feed it certain pieces of information so it can grasp some of my specific words, my narrative logic, the projects I'm working on. I keep feeding it information and explaining, this is like this, here you're wrong, here you're right. It learns very well and quickly. And yesterday I asked it a question. How do you understand the word pleshezavar, which, as you know, I use? What did it answer me? It says, pleshezavar is a mocking term for an elderly, outdated politician with authoritarian tendencies. It's a character stuck in prehistoric paranoia, imperial ambitions, and fears. A figure who, despite their outward obsolescence, still tries to influence the modern world. Well, then it went on to explain that Plesh means bald spot, and Zavr supposedly means prehistoric, so it combined them, and so on. Well, listen, isn't that just amazing? He wrapped it up like this. In the Ukrainian and Russian ironic context, Pleshezavr most often refers to Putin as a symbol of rigidity, absurdity, ideological mothballs, and aggression from the past century, disguised as strategic thinking. And this, well, I also feed it some texts from my own programs, among other things. In other words, it learns from some of my views. I'm telling you, it's just really cool. The amount of work on the project is significantly reduced. Really, it gets cut down a lot. For example, if I need to collect all of Putin's or, say, Merkel's statements about Ukraine by year with references, it does that for me instantly. So it really, well, it can do a lot of things. So I asked it another question. I said, listen, analyze my texts, a few of my shows, and show me where there's humor and where there's irony. It identified them. Not always accurately, sometimes it made something up on its own. But I said, do you now understand what it is, why I phrase things this way, why I say it like that? It said, well, yes, I more or less understood. I said, now come up with some phrases for me, something like plesiosaur, but about Medvedev and Lukashenko, and look at what it came up with. Of course, there was a but. Out of 10 phrases, there's hangover warrior, for example. Not bad. Alco Oracle. Really not bad. Of course, there are some that are so-so, but still. And now for Lukashenko. Bulbaführer, that one's been used for a long time, so it probably pulled it from somewhere else, but still. Potato Prince. Ah, how good is that, right? Isn't it? A collective farm Reich. Not bad. And also club leader. Pretty good too, right? So this is something. He just keeps learning and learning and learns instantly. So soon. I'm already, honestly, it's starting to scare me. But anyway, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. If possible, support the fundraiser, subscribe to the channel, have a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.